Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Welcome, welcome. Take your seats. Thank you all very much for coming out today, if in fact you have.
Yes. I am Mark Merlino.
I am Rod O'Reilly, and together we are known as Two Old Furry Fans. That's what we do on our podcast, so hi.
To start this out, I'm going to run a trailer. This is the trailer for the documentary, The Fandom. People that have seen, they had 5 episodes, 15, 20-minute episodes on YouTube.
I think they're up to like 8 now, actually. I found a couple more.
Like a mini-series. But this trailer is for the actual documentary film, which they intend to release, have a wide release. They're going to see if they can get some awards for it. This trailer was just released about 2 weeks ago, and it'll help introduce who we are.
And why supposedly we're qualified to be sitting up here.
High school was rough. High school was rough. Once I discovered the fandom, I could chat with people online. I could express my creativity. I could make friends.
I think people join furry because the fandom focuses on understanding yourself and expressing it.
It's not just about the animal characters, it's about the people. You've got writers, artists, animators, performers, musicians. It's like a party.
I could see my house from here.
Well, let me tell you a story. It was always about this thing. It was not about us. And if you asked who we were and could you point at us, they wouldn't know. We never wanted to be celebrities.
We'd started an anime club in 1977, and it was the first anime club. But a lot of the people were also into animal characters.
Rod and Mark are effectively the grandparents of the furry fandom. They are the ones who helped put together the first furry parties.
Is this a little better?
They are the ones that helped put together the first furry convention in 1989.
In the very beginning of the fandom, it was all about the art.
They had the same revelation as I did. I'm not the only one.
People started discovering that there was, in fact, an LGBT contingent in the furries. And it was positive.
It was like a quest to find more people who liked the same thing we liked.
It had a really good run, but then there was negative publicity about it.
It was viewed as what is this deviant thing, it's all about the sex.
Unfortunately, that was the image that was now given, and this is what the world was seeing.
You don't tell your family, you don't tell your work, you don't tell other people.
Furry fandom has attracted every stripe of the political spectrum. We could all sit around and discuss Donald Duck, but if we got into whether or not there should be gay marriage allowed, there would be bottles being thrown.
The pushback against adult content in furry is an attempt to push LGBT furs out of furry.
For a lot of people, this community helped them discover what that means. How could you just try to say it doesn't exist? That's insane.
When I transitioned, I actually started first in art. As I transitioned, so did my character. And it really helped me cope with it.
I found my best friends in the fandom. I found my boyfriend through the fandom.
We are not just here for fluffy fun. We're here to help each other. And we are helping each other.
The fandom is something I'm the most proud of in my life.
I felt, I'm home. I'm finally home.
If you see him around, he said he might try to drop by at some point, but one of the crew working on that, which is Ash, is floating around the con. He's this skinny guy with glasses wearing a yellow Rauerbrazel t-shirt, and there's not a lot of Rauerbrazel t-shirts around. So, and if you don't know what Rauerbrazel is, we'll explain it to you.
Yes.
He's the editor of the...
Yeah, he's actually the editor of that masterpiece. That is the trailer for a film. I don't know how long it's going to actually be, but they're supposed to premiere it at Outfest in Los Angeles next year, and it might even go on to be nominated for an Oscar. We hope so.
Coming to a film festival near you.
So anyway, we've done a lot of panels at conventions about the history of furry fandom, and I thought that at some point most people had heard the original backstory. So why we make this a Q&A is we really want people to ask questions if they have any questions about anything involving where the fandom came from and how we were involved in it. So feel free to do that at any time. Otherwise, we'll do a bit of a recap on how we got involved.
Can I do my 20-second version?
Sure.
Which will probably take about a minute.
Oh,
and a half.
there is
Yes.
Ash, the editor of
Claps for Ash. We just watched the trailer. And as usual, I've got something on my cheek, pardon me. Okay, so, personal situation. I was born in the mid-60s. Yes, I feel old. And among the first things I ever remember catching my attention, people say, how do furries get made? I say furries don't get made. Furries are born. They discover it at some point. My discovery came in the late 60s when Dr. Osamu Tezuka, who, if you don't know that name, he is basically the Walt Disney of Japan, imported to the United States two shows, one called Amazing 3 and the other one called Kimba the White Lion, and I was instantaneously hooked. A few years later, in the early 70s, Disney released an animated film called The Many Adventures of Robin Hood, and I was hooked even further. And things just started snowballing from there. But what was really special for me in particular was 1977, Disney came out with a film called The Rescuers, based on Marjorie Sharp's children's books. And again, I saw it, I went bananas, but at this point, I was going like, I want something more than just seeing this film and saying I like it. I want to find friends who I can chat about the movie with and, you know, the fine geeky details of this film. And none of the friends that I had in school were that particular weird. So it was, so the thing that I realized looking back many years later is I was looking for fandom. Many years before I had any idea what a fandom is. Okay? So around the early 1980s, I finally talked my parents into letting me go to one of these weird things called a science fiction convention, because they had started to proliferate after Doctor Who started showing up on our shores. And 1980, my first science fiction convention that had an art show. Okay, I had already discovered, even through before 1980, that I was a big fan of the family Mustelidae. Weasels, otters, skunks, badgers, wolverines, all of that, okay? And my first science fiction convention I go to with an art show, here in the art show are these pictures of pine martens and otters with antennae, like bugs. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Who the heck drew this? Oh, there's this guy, he's running the anime video room. He drew those. So I walk up to this guy, And I say, pardon me, sir, why do your pine martens have antenna? And this guy was kind of impressed that a kid my age knew what the heck a pine marten is. So thus began a relationship which wound up many years later with this guy turning into my husband. So there's that for us. 1985. We are attending WesterCon, which is the Western Regional Science Fiction Convention. It used to be one of the big ones, travels different cities every year. And we were attending the WesterCon in Sacramento, and a buddy of his, who would eventually go on to create a very well-known and very well-used animation program, one of the first programs designed for a PC to do animation, said, hey, we're not doing anything tonight. You want to host a room party? Well, what are we going to do? You've got some of your animation with you, and you've got some of your art with you of all that crazy cartoon animal stuff, right? We said, yeah. Said, well, we'll do that. So we hosted a party and called it the Prancing Skill Tear Party. We showed the VHS copy of Animalympics, which is this guy was one of the few people who had that. Not as in the released to the stores one, but the one that was actually recorded off TV for the Winter Games and sliced up and returned to the original Summer Games. This guy actually did that, okay? So that was very popular. A bunch of Warner Brothers cartoons, which people didn't get a chance to see uncut very often because they didn't show them uncut on TV, etc., so on and so forth. And people liked it. Fast forward 1 year, we have been talking through this old-fashioned thing called the mail, because this was 1985 and there wasn't an awful lot of anything resembling the internet at that point. We had been talking to people in the mail about this funny animal thing we were into, and eventually the word furry started floating around, okay? So, 1986, WesterCon, HalleyCon is held, I'll get you 1 second, I promise. HalleyCon is held in San Diego, and they decided, the convention itself decided to hold a panel called What Is This Thing Called Furry Fandom? And they had this guy, they had Fred Patton. For those who remember Fred, he passed away from us last year. And a couple of other people talking about various aspects of funny animal and furry fandom, including plushie collecting and people who actually raced horses and all this kind of stuff. And that evening, we decided to hold what we called a furry party, which we said, are you into furry art? We're into furry art. Come join us. Now, there had been artist parties for a long, long time at science fiction conventions, but they were invitation only. You had to have art in the art show, and you had to know somebody who was actually running the party to even get an invitation or even find out it was happening. We put up posters all over the place and said, hey, are you into this stuff? Not, are you a drawer of this stuff? Are you into this stuff? And we got artists showing up, and we got fans showing up. That was something unique. So that's my quick rundown of back in the 80s, how things got rolling. And basically, we went from there to here. I should throw in the middle, as the video said, we started the very first named and specifically themed furry fandom convention, Conference, in 1989. Our total attendance, our total membership, as in people who sent us money to get involved, was 100 people. The total attendance was 65, and the total fursuits was 2. Think about that and look out there. You, sir, in the check, you had a question.
Well, about the word furry to refer to fans of anthro characters, wasn't that, like, rather than being coined by someone who was actually a furry themselves, wasn't that coined by just
yes,
some random...
the best we've been able to determine, thinking back, we had a roommate in my house. I had a lot of roommates who worked for me in my computer wiring and network business. We had a roommate who was a gamer, big D&D gamer. Actually wrote scenarios for publications in Dragon Magazine and such. And he was running. Anyone know what a BBS is? It's an early
bulletin board service
of computer communication, done over phone dial-up. And he was kind of writing articles about science fiction fandom. And at the time, there was an explosion of really high quality stuffed animals. So people in the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society were starting to collect all these stuffed animals and bring them to their conventions. And they had like room parties where they'd trade animals and show off their latest animals. And they called themselves fuzzy fans. And at the time, since this gentleman whose nickname was Dr. Pepper was kind of in the middle of our house with our anime club and all these people doing anthropomorphic art and trading it and collecting it, he basically said, so they're fuzzy fans, you people must be furry fans. And the name just sort of stuck, even though it, some people say it's not that good. It's shorter than anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic could mean, like the cars in Cars are anthropomorphic.
I have a very, very broad umbrella definition of anthropomorphic fandom. When people ask me, what is an anthropomorphic, I will tell them to their face, an anthropomorphic character is anything, and I stand by that, anything that is not a human being that in some way acts like a human being. Usually the simplest method being talking. If it's a talking thing that normally does not talk, it is anthropomorphic. So, when people say, does furry fandom include X? Usually the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So when the first word furry was conceptualized for, what you label yourself as back in the 80s?
Yeah.
What were some other ideas that were thrown around to call yourself?
Well, there was a gentleman who was very into the idea of spirit animals.
Spirit animals? Spirit animals.
And totems, kind of Native American stuff. And he liked the term therianthrope.
Which I think you can understand why we didn't gravitate towards spell it.
Of course, then there was anthropomorphic, which Steve Galacci used when he was setting up his Albedo comic. He called the comic and the other comics which were published alongside of his in the anthologies Albedo anthropomorphics.
Also, that was around the time when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles hit hard. And Albedo hit around the same time. And also in the back pages of Albedo, we got the first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo. And even people in the regular, quote-unquote, regular comics industry started noting, hey, there's something going on there. And some of them were referring to this as serious, funny animals. So that's one of the things. Yes, sir, again.
Well, see, that's interesting because, basically every source I've heard before talking about where the word furry originally came from just credits it to some anonymous person at the science fiction convention. I never seen anyone before who remembered who it was.
That's because we had him living in our living room at the time.
Yeah, I think probably after that, what made it stick was the fact that we called all of our parties furry parties. Because after the Prancing Skill Chair party, that's the name of our house, if Rod didn't point that out.
I'm sorry.
It's based on the concept of a pub or an inn, like the Prancing Pony in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings stories. A skill tear is a creature I created, which is a pine marten or an otter-like animal, more colorful though, that have antennas, which are actually part of their sensory mechanism. And that was the name that I gave to my parents' house by building a little pub sign for a weekend party that we had. And then when I moved to my apartment, I took the sign with me, and that sign is gone from every place I've lived until finally I built an actual lighted sign.
Which you saw in the trailer.
Which was in the trailer, and these little cards. People can get these cards. They have a lot of internet links to things that we do. Our family does for the fandom. But yeah, I think what made it stick was all the furry party posters that started showing up at every con. both here on the West Coast and in the Midwest, people would host furry parties, and they were called furry parties. There's like hundreds of examples of posters. I think I have some here.
There should be some in there.
Yeah.
And we got lots and lots of early art. And as Joe Strike, by the way, I'll make a plug there for Joe Strike's book, Furry Nation. That was one of the gentlemen that you saw in the trailer there also. Yay! As Joe pointed out, there were an awful lot of people who walked into our early furry parties and kind of looked around and said, "You mean other people like this stuff too?" Because they never knew. There was no internet at the time, so the only way that fans learned about other fans was two ways, and that was through going to conventions like this one, which were more generalized, comic book or science fiction conventions, however much you want to spread that umbrella, or those umbrellas, and through the mail, through things like fanzines and stuff like that, or APAs. Who here knows what an APA is, an Amateur Press Association? Oh, just a couple. Okay. An APA works like this. It's kind of a club fanzine, and the way it works, let's say you have 50 people in your club. Everybody writes up their thing, whether it's drawing a picture or writing an article or whatever else for that quarter's issue. You make 50 copies, you bring them together to a collator's place, wherever that is. You collate them, each issue gets one from each person, and then you hand them out to the people. So it's a magazine, but it's a magazine that is literally usually only known about by the members of it. On occasion, you might make more copies to hand out at conventions and stuff like that, but most often, most APAs, no one who isn't specifically involved in it has any idea that it exists. This is different than a more generalized fanzine, where it's, you submit stuff to a person and they make the copies and they go out and sell them, they hope. Needless to say, there's more money involved in this, so there were a lot more APAs than there were fanzines. But one of the very first, in fact, we think the first, funny animal-oriented APA was called Vootie, V-O-O-T-I-E. And that was started by two gentlemen from Minneapolis, Ken Fletcher and Reed Waller. If you don't know the name Reed Waller, you should, because he later on became very well known for creating Omaha the Cat Dancer. So those two started what we believe to be the first funny animal APA, and it became very, very, very big between the late 70s, I think like 76, 77, and 1981, when it got replaced by another fanzine called Rower Brazzle, which he's wearing the t-shirt for. And that one lasted for, I swear, 2 decades. It's technically speaking still going, but it's a shadow of its former self. Yeah, it was difficult. When Fred became incapacitated, it was very difficult to carry on. But at its height, around about the early 90s, Rower Browser was as thick as a phone book, for those of you who remember phone books. It was huge, okay? It had hundreds of artists and a very long waiting list. So,
the director of Lion King also a member of Rower Browser?
No, but the director of Lilo and Stitch was.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people got started in the APAs. These are early furry party posters. This is actually the first poster from the first party that was called Furry, but it wasn't called on the poster, and that's what a skill tear looks like. That's an aquatic skill tear. And this was also in '86. This may have been for Comic-Con, but I'm not sure.
And that's his artwork, by the way, so you see why he caught my attention.
There are scans of Vootie on there.
Yeah. The thing with Vootie is, of course, the term furry didn't exist back then. What they were doing was called funny animal. And funny animal referred to a type of comic book and strip, like Walt Kelly's Pogo, that were very popular before superheroes kind of took over everything. And the whole reason they started Vootie was they wanted to have an APA that was based on something besides superhero comics. But early on in the APA, artist from Canada, Tarl Wayne, made this statement about if we're all adults and we're doing things with funny animals, why aren't we doing more adult stuff? So for those who have probably heard somewhere that there was once upon a time this funny animal fandom that got sexualized and got turned into furry fandom, didn't happen. Because there wasn't an organized funny animal fandom, there were just people who wanted to become cartoonists or who collected the comics. And very early on, the concept of adult situations, adult stories, writing, and artwork was right there at the beginning before it was even called furry.
Remember that a lot of the comic artists who got started in places like Voodie and Raw Brows and stuff, that these were fanatics for underground comics. So they had a bit of experience with people who draw about sex and drugs and violence and more drugs and more drugs and so forth. So they weren't coming from a squeaky clean Disney unless they were following Air Pirates or Wallace Wood or other people who were making fun of Disney in a rather nasty way. So there was a bit of naughty in this stuff from the get-go before we had even met.
Okay, come on up and find them for me. Sorry. Put it on. The interesting thing was that we were hosting these parties at conventions, and like Rodney said, there was enough interest from the people organizing the conventions, the programming people, that we had panels. One of the more famous ones happened at Baycon. It was called Furry Fandom Threat or Menace. And a lot of people took that title to be serious. It really wasn't. There really wasn't an animosity early on to furry fandom from science fiction fandom and comic fandom. What was happening is there were other fandoms forming around the science fiction community, and a lot of them were getting extremely active. And in the case of Baycon, the anime fans were taking the convention over quite literally. They were using all the function space for their screening rooms. They were publishing huge translation tomes that they would give away so you could enjoy the anime because it wasn't translated, nor was it subtitled. And eventually Baycon said, hey, you guys in the anime, you guys should start your own conventions because we haven't got room for you.
So they did.
And they did. And by 1988, Rodney and I were going, maybe we should just try our own little convention that's furry-based. And that was where Conference Zero came from. So you found Voodoo Television. Yeah. So those are.
Yeah, we did this weird thing. We weren't quite sure. We knew we were starting something totally out of the blue, basically, in terms of subject matter, at least. So our very first convention we called Conference Zero, as in this is a trial run. See if anybody shows up. And as I said, 65 of them did. Convention horror stories. 65 of them show up, and 35 of them immediately caught a 24-hour bug and spent Sunday morning like this.
Good old concrete. But people go, well, gee, how did you contact people, back then when there was no internet? We had a couple of good sources. One of them was Rodney painstakingly going around and dropping off flyers at comic book stores, as all over LA, Orange County, San Diego County. But another one was there was a gentleman who started something called the Fandom Directory. And for about 20 years, he went to science fiction conventions and passed out these questionnaires for people to fill out. And then he combined essentially what was a telephone book for fandom that he would publish. And people would go through and they would check off their interests specifically, and then he started selling mailing lists. You could actually write him and say, could you give me a mailing list from your latest directory that includes all the people who are into funny animals and animation and cartoons and comics. And we would take that mailing list and we would send out first postcards, and then later newsletters. And those newsletters were originally just for the convention, but Rodney decided to make them general newsletters for furry interest, and it became Infernation, which was a paper published and mailed newsletter for several years, and now is a website. So infernation.com, you can go and find out about new furry stuff. It's not a review site, it's just an introduction where it introduces you things. And if you go to places like Flavor, you'll notice that he's a big contributor to Flavor. Oh, there's a picture, the fan directory.
The actual ad for the first actually, that's for
Conference 1,
Although Conference 0 was advertised as Starlog.
Yeah, I showed that already.
The other place that we managed to get out, remember I mentioned about fanzines, there was a gentleman we met at one of our furry parties. We started hosting furry parties regularly at science fiction conventions, and at a few little science fiction conventions we wound up with a party bigger than the convention. There was a gentleman named Carl Maurer, which, yes, that's very difficult to say, but he came into one of our parties one time and he said, hey, everybody give me your name and your mailing address. I'm going to start a furry fanzine. And, we've been in fandom long enough, we'd heard a lot of, fanish projects. It's like, someday I'm gonna, and we're like, yeah, sure you will. So we're like, we give him our name. Okay, fine, great, go away, thank you. Next furry party, we show up and he plops this fanzine called Furversion into our laps. And at first it was just mostly the mailing list and a couple of pieces of artwork, but people started submitting more artwork to him. People submitted stories to him, including yours truly. And it became a very big thing. It was one of the first published, available at convention fanzines dedicated. So by the time, that was around 87. So by the time around late 88, when we were getting ready to put together Conference 0, he had already put out about like 8 issues, because they were quarterly. And so we had quite a cadre, as it were, of funny animal and furry artists and such to get in touch with. So we put ads in for Version, of course. And Carl actually ran our first art show at that. And the first dealer's room, which was about 4 tables. Again, small beginnings, but where things go.
Yeah, this is the original issues. These were just basically newsletters with occasionally a piece of art, or a little tiny ad for something in the fandom. Later it became more of an actual zine with a cover and table of contents, and some of the people involved in Furversion in the beginning got together and started a magazine called Yarf. And it was probably the first long-run fanzine you could buy. You'd subscribe to it or you could buy it at conventions. And a lot of the original people who have become well-known artists and writers in the fandom were in either APPAs or in those fanzines in the early years.
Now that's for version number 8. I particularly recommend that one, because my story's in it. Plug.
All this stuff is online, browsable.
Yes, we should mention about conference.com at this point, ...
It's on this card.
This lunatic over here has had a project for the past couple of years.
Scanning the house.
Yes, basically going through our entire collection between Mark, myself, and everyone else who has lived there, who left their stuff behind. And he is digitizing pretty much everything and putting it up there. Lots of flyers, lots of fanzines, lots of other things. And if you, and by the way, additional plug, if you're ever curious about cool video shorts of furry content, this guy has a website called Furry.Today, where every weekday he puts up an animated or live-action short with some degree of furry content. And he has done it consistently for about 3 years. Give it up for Changa Lion. So, again, this is a Q&A, so pause high if you got any questions. Go ahead.
So, in the trailer, it talked about the LGBT culture integrating with the furry fandom. When do you think that started occurring?
When we said, hey, what do you think about us putting together a party for furry fandom? No, from the start, we started, shaking the trees. Well, no, we didn't shake. We shook the trees for furries, I'll say that. You'll hear different stories from different people, but I will tell you from us, we never, ever sought out LGBT people. They just showed up. Now, somebody recently pointed out that basically because the two of us were, two bisexual cis men in a relationship and we were doing this stuff, we created a safe space for LGBT fans to come and feel comfortable talking about the fact that they were not only into funny animals, but they may have been into funny animals in an adult fashion, and they may have been into funny animals in an adult fashion that were, gender-wise not what one would expect. Again, that's not something we set out to do, but it just seemed to make sense because, people who were, into Miss Bianca a little bit more than everybody else was into Miss Bianca, we knew we were starting something weird. So we figured we better say, hey, safe talk space, we won't laugh at you. And in so doing, we just happened to have created an LGBT safe space. That before anybody was talking about that kind of thing. And it was necessary because, again, this isn't something we thought about at the time, but looking back, we can realize that science fiction fandom, comic book fandom, and animation fandom, particularly animation fandom within the animation industry itself, at that time, late 70s, early 80s, they could be hellishly homophobic. Ask anyone who is currently an out person who works in animation, and they will tell you what it was like trying to work back in those days. It was not fun, okay? So the fact that we created this thing and we said, at very least, it's okay to talk about the fact. We created a safe space, and there it was, and it just expanded from there. And from the get-go, there were other people in furry fandom who said, where did this come from? And we're like, it's been there all along. Where have you been? Other question back there? Saw Paul. Pause high if you got questions. I need to see you. Oh, come on. Don't be shy. We're not.
On the timeline, I think probably the biggest, I call the second wave of the fandom, was based on online role play, mainly on MUX. Lots and lots of college students spending way too much time role playing on these text-based adventures that were being run secretly on the computers on the campuses, and people are dialing in from all over the place. At Conference 3 and Conference 4, we got online and invited all these people to show up, and for the first time we had people showing up and in the lobby, and they would sit on the couch and cuddle, and this freaked some people out. And the same people that were freaked out by that were the people who are responsible for almost all of the furry hate that's on the internet. And they're the same people responsible for things that's happened at this convention, for other conventions being sabotaged, for other conventions being canceled. It's the same people. And essentially, it didn't dawn on us this was happening and how it was happening until we started kind of collaborating all this stuff and talking to people, talking to psychologists and people of the furry, on the furry project, people working on documentaries, that all along it was homophobia that was poisoning the fandom from the inside. So
And somewhat from the outside, too.
You know, people go, well, why is this documentary so heavy on the LGBT thing? Well, one reason, of course, is the person creating the documentary is trans, and felt that it was easier for her because she was in the fandom. But it is important. It just, we didn't realize it at the time. We were inviting people with an imagination that liked animal people, not realizing that so many of them were on the spectrum. And, you know, we were too, but that we didn't think that was an issue.
I lost my train of thought. Oh, never mind. I'll catch the next one.
One thing on Conference 3, that was the first year I think you put the virtually, where people put their handle on their badges, and I think that freaked a few people out.
Yeah, I thought it was 3, but people are telling me it's 4. I actually thought it was 3. Yeah, we gave people a little "Hi, I'm" badges that said "Hi, I'm virtually," so they could put their handle on there if they wanted people to know who their handle was.
Oh yeah, now I remember. People ask us sometimes, you know, hey, didn't it bother you early on when the media found out about this and they would do reports about this sudden thing called furry fandom and they got things wrong? And it sounds so dumb looking back now, but the answer at the time is no, it didn't bother us because we were just tickled that they were paying attention to us in the first place. You know, if they got it a little wrong, we said, oh yeah, fine, whatever. I mean, you know, going back, you know, I would have raised royal hell with half of the things that they got wrong in the situation. But as I said at the time, we were just, you know, oh, it's cool. Someone's looking at us. You know, these days, you know, I see a lot of stuff on fur fandom, and I mean positive stuff about fur fandom. Very positive, but it always starts with this sentence. What is furry fandom? Well, furry fandom is people who enjoy dressing up in... If you start with that sentence, you've lost me. Okay? I will give this... I will engrave this on my gravestone, okay? Okay? Saying that furry fandom is about fursuiting is like saying that Star Trek fandom is about wearing pointy ears. Okay? If you think that, you don't get it. Okay?
Back there, sir?
Oh, I was just flailing, ranting with you.
Okay.
Worse than that is fools telling other people, say, oh, you're not a real furry if you don't have a fursuit.
Yeah, well...
There are always there are always what we call purity guardians in just about every human endeavor. There are what we call purity guardians. We are tremendously polysexual and pansexual when it comes to that kind of thing. Like I said, in my definition, you know, I mean, I've gotten into this argument with people. People will pound on my head and say, no, brony fandom is not furry fandom because the characters that we like are four-legged.
Wait a minute.
I'm serious.
Well, no, there were people who said Lion King wasn't a furry movie because
the characters,
they're all like animals and they walk around on 4 legs.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Well, the new one is.
Well, one thing that I would point out that Rodney mentioned, but I want to make sure that people get it, is that there was always a lot of art. Art was really important in comic and science fiction fandom, but it was separate. The artists did their thing, and people bought their art. And when we started with conventions, we invited the artists we knew and we could find, who of course were mostly comic artists or they were trying to become professional comic artists. And they came, and their small groups of fans came. And a whole bunch of other people came who were fans. And the true fans kind of looked at, who are all these other people we don't know? And what are they doing here? Because it was all segregated back then. So what made furry fandom an actual fandom is it was completely okay if you didn't draw, never tried to draw, never wrote a story or anything. If you just liked the stuff, you were just as welcome. as anybody else. And what came of this is, at first, hundreds and then thousands of new artists, because the community supported them. Whereas they weren't trying to become the next syndicated comic strip writer. They were completely happy drawing this stuff because they loved to, and extremely happy they could draw it and other fans would buy it from them. So a whole economy grew up over the fandom, which we couldn't have predicted either.
Way before there was such a thing as an artist alley where you're going in there and dropping down $80 for a pencil sketch, there were art parties, and again, for us, they were open. Anybody could come in, but there were just artists sitting around, and, this person is drawing, a Bloomin' Da Vinci, and this person over here is drawing something that looks like, Mommy is going to say, "Oh, that's beautiful, Timmy. I'll put that up on the fridge with a magnet." And they would exchange art. That was perfectly fine. There was just people drawing for other people, and skill levels at that point didn't matter. We were just all doing art for each other free. Whether it was a quick pencil sketch or...
the black sketchbooks, which were kind of a tradition for the first 10 years of the fandom, where people would get a black blank sketchbook and just walk around and drop it in front of an artist. And they would draw in it and say, "Here you go." Because for the artist, it was practice. It was spontaneous practice, which is really important if you're trying to be an artist. And people would have sketchbooks full of hundreds of drawings they got for free. And if you were an artist and you had a sketchbook, they would be trading drawings back and forth.
So, who here... Oh, yes. Question in the back.
In the early days of organized fandom with the mailing lists and the conventions starting up, were those folks starting to feel alienated by the general sci-fi community and their conventions as well, where they didn't feel really that they belonged? Did people still in general go to the general sci-fi conventions?
Like I said, but remember, for the first couple of years before we started the first convention, we were holding parties at other conventions, at science fiction and comic book conventions. And in general, there were a lot of people coming in and walking in and looking around and saying, "Whoa, there are other people besides me into this stuff." So they were going to general science fiction conventions because they were into Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, what have you. And they were just kind of keeping quiet about their funny animal thing. And then along come our parties, and all of a sudden they're like, "Whoa, I can talk out loud about this stuff. Amazing." The short answer is yes, they felt a little alienated, but they felt alienated in the first place because they were going there to geek about Star Wars and Star Trek and all this other stuff. So they were kind of feeling outsiders. So we wound up being the outsiders of the outsiders, which is kind of weird. I've joked for many years that it's very, very strange to have a Star Trek fan tell you to your face, "Go away, you're too weird." But...
Well, I mean, the concept... Go ahead.
Do you think that's what it is, those people mostly being a fan of something that hasn't been established, where it's something more personal to them than it is to...
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's difficult for some people to grasp the concept of a fandom that doesn't have a particular media thing that it can point to. We kind of point in all directions, but in a lot of cases we're drawing what comes out of our own imaginations, or writing about it, or thinking about it, or asking someone to draw it for us. But early on, for example, Comic-Con was a place where furries would flock to. The tables were expensive and very hard to get, but a lot of furry artists would combine their money and get a whole bunch of tables, and they'd have a little furry ghetto in the middle of the convention. And then we would have, we would find a place near the convention center where there was function space available that hadn't been already prearranged, and we'd have a party. So Comic-Con for a long time was a big furry center. And then when the furry conventions got big, the furry artists said, "Why should I go to Comic-Con? I go to Anthrocon, I can sell 10 times more stuff."
On our YouTube, we have footage of 1988 Comic-Con in kind of the furry ghetto. It's probably on the card, you can probably check. We also have footage of Conference Zero and lots of early furry parties. Hopefully more as soon as we digitize it.
Yeah, like I said, it's the first conference Zero. We had exactly two fursuits.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. R.I.P. Vicky Wyman. Vicky Wyman is a great example of somebody who was very big in fantasy art for years, and then along comes furry fandom, and suddenly she's doing a furry comic, and she took over the world for a short period of time. So, you know, like I said, a lot of these people had been active in science fiction and comic book fandom for a while, and then along comes furry fandom, and now they get to talk about this other thing that they've been into for a time and hadn't, you know, had an opportunity to be open about. So, again, providing a safe space.
Yeah, my origin, like Rodney says, my furry awakening, apparently, my parents told me this story. I was a Navy brat, and my parents would take me to Lambert Field in St. Louis to the theater there, and they would show movies to the servicemen for free. And they almost always got Disney films. So my folks would take me to the theater, and I would scream and cry on my mother's lap. I was like 3 and just, you know, couldn't handle the movie. And then one time they went and they saw Bambi there. And my parents said, I looked up at the screen and I stared at the screen for the entire film and didn't make a sound. And they said, boy, this is cool, we should remember this.
And then when you were 11 years old...
Yeah. Bambi came around again in release, and I had been a huge fan of animation. Go to Disneyland, and my parents could not get me out of the art and animation exhibit. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to go on the rides. I wanted to be in there looking how animated films were made. And I went out and bought the Gold Key comic for Bambi, and I went to see the movie, and I'm sitting there going, I remember this. I know exactly what's going to happen. I know what that character's going to say. I didn't know why.
And then his parents told him about the story when he was 4 years old. So, as I said, I will hold to my contention that furry fans are not made. Furry fans are born. And at some point you see something that goes boing. I have what I call the nose grabber thing. You know, people say, are you a furry fan or are you not? If you see something anthropomorphic and basically this invisible hand goes, you're a furry, okay? You know, there's this thing in us. We just notice these things. You know, what is a furry fan? You know, is it something sexual or not? Furries are people who notice anthropomorphics. You know, I'll get philosophical for a second and say anthropomorphism is something we've done for millennia. You know, we take animals of other species who are perfectly happy to go about their lives, and we, for some strange reason, put our words in their heads and have them talk back to us for some psychological reason. You know, done that for forever, you know, a long, long time. Furry fans are the people who notice this and say, why do we do that? Isn't that interesting? And so forth. So... Anyway, other questions out there about... roundabout... when was that? It would be 1990, roughly. Oh, pardon me. Just before 2000, right about 99 or something. Yeah, 99. These folks come to us and say they're looking to start another furry convention. There's one of the two fursuits from Conference Zero. That's a Bambioid as created.
Hill's Bambioid created by
Jerry Collins.
Jerry Collins for his very serious space opera comic based on Captain Harlock, the anime. Fursuit designed, created, and performed by Robert Hill.
Oh, by the way, we should re-emphasize that point if you didn't catch it in the trailer. Before any of this happened, literally, back in 1977, this guy right here was one of 5 people who started the very first anime fan club in North America, period.
Yeah, that was mentioned in the documentary.
So I love to jibe him. It's like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, his fault.
Thanks. The animation industry was kind of on the skids back in the 70s. There was a lot of stuff on television that was really poor quality. The Animators Union was keeping people employed because the studios would hire people for 6 months and then lay them off. And lo and behold, they started showing Japanese animation on the UHF Japanese channels. And there were no Betamaxes, no VHSs back then, but there was the giant U-matic studio cassettes. And Wendell Washer, a friend of mine who was an animator and a storyboard artist for Filmation, had one of these machines. He started taping these Japanese shows, which were done under the same budget constraints as US shows, but they looked 100 times better. And I took a video player I had, and a bunch of his cassettes, and I went to LostCon, science fiction convention, and took over a room on Sunday and started showing these things. And the room filled up with people. And after we did this at a couple of cons, Fred Patton, who was a fan historian and really into funny animals, said, why don't we start showing these at the Losses Clubhouse on a Saturday? So we started doing that, and when the Losses Clubhouse said, well, we can't always fit you in on every Saturday that you want to do this on because we have other events going on, we all got together in a park in North Hollywood. Wendell Washer, Judy Niver, myself, Robin Lydon, and said, let's find a venue. Let's find a place where we can do a Saturday screening. And we ended up at the Animators Union Hall in Thousand Oaks. And we would get people from our fan group, and animators would come in because it was the Union Hall and sit down and watch the stuff. Is it Peter
Who's that
Chung?
weirdo?
Yeah, that's Rodney.
Hair.
DJ. Yes. So that was the start of the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, CFO, which was the first U.S. anime club. And we ended up with chapters in Chicago, New York City, San Antonio, Texas, and other places. And eventually, the anime clubs at college campuses took over showing this stuff before it was actually available to buy in this country. We actually had people come to our meetings who were some of the people who basically bought animation from Japan, translated it, combined it into syndicated shows to show on television.
My point being that if you weren't aware of it, it is true. Anime fandom and furry fandom both practically sprung up simultaneously, and they've been kind of entwined ever since. And where does it eventually wind up? Well, this year we get this show called Beastars. ...
Yeah. I don't know how many of you successfully pirated or found someone who'd pirated Beastars. It's a very interesting show. It's kind of like, Zootopia director's cut. Or your typical drama-filled Japanese boarding school, except everybody's anthro. It is going to show up on Netflix next year in this country. But all of the people who like their furry yanks are going to love this show.
And it is gorgeous. It's absolutely
very, very
beautiful.
too.
So, anyway, we're winding down towards where somebody else is going to need this room. So, any other cues for our A out there on all this stuff? Anything that we want to fill in on the middle? That's the beginning. By the way, I wasn't joking before. We do have a netcast called Two Old Furry Fans. It's available at one long word, twooldfurryfans.com. We don't have a lot of episodes yet. We've kind of been going through the history, just the two of us talking to each other, and I will admit We've run kind of face first into some technological difficulties. We're trying to get in touch with other people who do podcasts out there to figure out how they overcome some of the technical aspects thereof, because we're old, we don't know half this stuff. You kids these days. And but we do have several episodes up on there. Information is information.com is updated semi-regularly. If you don't find it at information.com, it is mirrored on flera.com. Furry.today, as I said, is just furry.today. So you can look it up.
Conference.com.
Yep, and conference.com. All of which, except for
Are
information,
on this card,
Are on this-
except that I typoed the 2. You can pass them around.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
And if people want some information about Infernation, I got this up here. So, but anyway, other questions out there? Other pause? Yes.
You want one? From Conference Zero until MFF 2019, what's been like the thing that surprised you the most about the growth of the fandom?
Oh, easily fan content.
We're out already.
Oh, good grief. Do you have more?
What?
If you, how about this? If you're in a group,
Or Telegram.
yeah, Telegram. I don't know.
Yeah.
Share with others, I guess.
So there was a question out there, what's the thing that surprised us the most? And I've got to say it's fan content. There is an amazing community of specifically, and I mean self-admitted furry fans, not just people who happen to do anthropomorphic characters, but self-admitted furry fans who are creators of webcomics. The webcomic community by itself is just, oh my gosh. But there are people creating animation. There are people creating still good old-fashioned on dead trees comics. Of course, the whole furry fiction thing, available from Rabbit Press and Sofa Wolf and Fur Planet and all of those guys. So yeah, no, just, I mean, we've always, we are geeks for creative people. And, there for a long time we couldn't get anywhere near the creative people we wanted to get to because they were too busy being professional creative people and they didn't want to schmooze with their fans. Well, fortunately, in furry fandom, schmoozing with the fans is the entire point. So since we all started from, just being geeky wannabes, the people who have now become geeky actually haves are much easier to talk to. And I always recommend it. So, I adore creative people. So, if you have ideas, this is a great place for them.
Yeah, probably the biggest surprise to me was just the growth, just the fact that it grew so amazingly. And of course, the internet is to blame, and anyone knows the furries are responsible for the internet too. So it makes sense, It's like how many? Yeah, the furries built the internet.
You think that's a joke, you should see the names of some of the people who actually were inventing some of the early programming on the stuff that make the damn thing work.
Hell, just about any various open source project that happens to have some sort of anthropomorphic or animal character, there's probably a furry somewhere in that team or in all those projects. I mean, I'm amazed. I go through and find this weird old spam list, for anti-spam, and I look and I'm like, wait, I know that guy. He's been in the Phantom for.
So what is my next goal? My next evil scheme, okay? For someone who has a reputation of being a creator of evil schemes. My next evil scheme is we've got to officially take over Hollywood. We have taken it over kind of in underground because I happen to know personally any number of furry fans who work in any number of levels in Hollywood, both animation and live action, who feel that for whatever reason they can't get away with being open about their furry fandom. Sometimes it's they feel they can't be open about being furry fans. Sometimes it's they feel they can't be open about being fans. Because just being supposedly fanish will point you out as being weird enough that the rest of the people don't want to deal with you, supposedly. But, what's one thing that people have been complaining about Hollywood for a long time? They never have any good new ideas. Well, guess what furry fandom is made of? So,
How many people here, when they saw the Zootopia teaser, with the word anthropomorphic in it, thought that Disney had discovered us.
Yeah, I am sorry. The fact that they had to, point out that word, I'm sorry. I took that 100% as, hi!
Here's something silly. CalArts Films, 1988. Student films. There's one called Bring the Head of Charlie Brown, which is kind of a Charlie Brown special done by Sam Peckinpah with all blood and gore. But it was shown at a 1988 furry party. That was the narrator of that short is Rich Moore, director of Zootopia, written by, it was created by the guy who wrote Zootopia.
Jim Reardon.
Yeah, which was shown at a furry party in 1988, which I think coincidence? I don't think so.
Yes, Mr. Moore was also the voice of Schnookums.
Yes.
Which was shown extensively at early. No. There was this whole class in the late '80s of students at CalArts, at the California Institute of the Arts, which, by the way, was started by Walt Disney, if you didn't know. And a lot of animators have come through there. And there are some people in there, you talk to them openly about furry, and they're like, stay away from me, you weirdo. And then you look in their sketchbook.
Yes.
When they're not looking. Guess what? So, yeah.
Yeah, this little slideshow is something I put together for PawCon called The Mystery of Furry Fandom. I just stuck it on for something to look at while we ramble on here. Is there anything in this room after us?
I think so, but I'm not sure when.
Because nobody's shown up.
That's okay. They'll come flag us down when we have to.
Yeah.
So
they'll chase us out eventually, I guess.
But the one thing, if there's a takeaway I want from all of this, it's, I adore fursuits. I especially somebody made the comment, and this is one of my favorite comments anywhere. But Disney came out shortly after, not before, after Zootopia premiered. They premiered the official Disney Nick and Judy fursuits. Probably Nick and Judy costumes for them. And somebody online made the comment, we have come to the point where it's almost impossible to tell the difference between an official Disney costume and a well-made fursuit. And you look at them, and that's exactly what you think, okay? There are any number of fursuit makers I could point at who could easily have done that or better. So, I mean, we have outdone Hollywood in some cases. But having said that, I will still go down fighting and saying that the biggest crime to me is if ever we forget that this fandom started out as a fandom of art. So the people who need celebration in this fandom are the people who draw, and the people who make, and the people who create, okay? And that includes fursuit makers, okay? I love somebody who performs well, but the person who gets the pat on the back is the person who actually made that thing exist, okay? Because I know the work that goes into the design and actually physically making that stuff possible, okay? There's an awful lot of good Hollywood costume stuff, let's face it, is camera trickery. You can get away with an awful lot in an editing room to make something look cooler than it actually is. A fursuit, you've got to make it thing exist in front of you and work from all 360, okay? That's amazing, okay? Sculpture, art, animation, all this stuff that you can do, including writing, okay? Writing can be done well, writing can be done badly, and when people do it well, I love it.
Any more questions? Comments?
Well, I will make a plug here real quick. I realize that people are going to be a little bleary probably after tonight, but just to mention it, tomorrow morning at 11, right across the hallway over here, I will be presenting a presentation I've been doing for the past couple of years called Furry Movies. In this case, Furry Movies 2019. I'm going to go over... We have had a lot more furry feature films than you realize over this year, and there's a boatload of them coming up for 2020 also. So I'm going to be going over a lot of the stuff you've probably seen and a lot of stuff you might have missed. So I would appreciate if people show up for that. Again, that's 11 o'clock tomorrow, just across the hallway over here. And with that, if there's no more questions, we'll say thank you all very, very much. And we will also say, you're welcome.
Thank you. All right, let's get a
Absolutely.
Silver Gato Man, he bought me a coffee. Silver Gato Man, here is the song for thee. He likes to video all the panels at the cons. You should go and watch them whether they are short or long. Silver Gato Man, you video that's not a jibe. All of you go to his YouTube channel and like and subscribe.